And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Where do you want to set it up, bud?
Alright, so we had an idea that
So we want to sit in the chair and all of us.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So is that okay?
alright, so then we close the back, the front.
Can we get some short people in the front?
Yeah, we're just gonna.
But you're going to be in the picture too, though.
Yeah, hold on, let me just find myself in a position. So once I press it,
Where's
you're gonna be able
the thing where you can?
No, I'm going to be in it.
Good morning. My name is Wesley Liebler from Shadow Ridge School, and today we're interviewing David Lifton, author of Best Evidence. How are you today?
Fine, thank you very much.
So tell me, where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Brooklyn until I was about 7 or 8 years old. Then we moved to Rockaway Beach, New York. Wow. My father had a store in Brooklyn. He had a store sold electrical supplies. It's there to this day, run by his partner's children. And so, but I did not go into that business.
Okay.
My sister and I followed different paths.
And what's an early childhood memory that you remember from being in Rockaway?
Well, the one that I was thinking about this, the one I remember was when World War II ended and the Germans surrendered. That was May 1945, and there was a big parade down Rockaway Beach Boulevard, and I remember people banging garbage cans. Like the drums, yeah, that would be like cymbals. And I think I even probably went in that parade a little bit. But,
really?
Yeah, but I remember that parade very clearly.
Okay.
Rockaway Beach. And I also remember, I was an Eagle Scout, and I remember marching in the Columbus Day Parade in New York City when I was 13 or 14 down, I don't know what street it was, Fifth Avenue, and I carried the American flag. I remember that.
Wow. And what do you like about Rockaway?
Well, I love the ocean, I love the beach, and Rockaway Beach was the East Coast version, you might say, of Redondo Beach, California.
Okay.
Only it was much more cold, of course, in the winter.
Colder.
And we had hurricanes and stuff like that.
Okay. And do you have any other memories you want to share about Rockaway or your
Well,
early
when I was
childhood?
a young boy, we had a dog, a Dalmatian named Cinders, and I would walk the dog. And basically, I went to school in Rockaway Beach, public schools, and then my Then my parents sent me to a private school in Brooklyn. One of the parents drove us to school, and one of the people in our carpool, one of the people in my class, or one class ahead, was who became an assistant to Senator Edward Kennedy, and today he's at the Kennedy Library, James Flug.
That's amazing. So tell me about your siblings. Do you have any?
Yes, my sister, Judy,
Judy.
was 2 years younger than me, and she went to Smith. Smith. She went to a private school in Brooklyn. The schools in Rockaway, my mother and father didn't want me to go to the public schools for whatever reason. I think they're better now, or worse, I don't remember which. But I went to a private school in Brooklyn called Poly Prep, which was in that thing called the Little Ivy League with Horace Mann, St. Paul, and other schools.
Okay, yeah. And tell me, what colleges did you apply for?
Okay, well, when you're a junior in high school, you have to decide where you want to go to college. So my parents drove me all around the colleges in New England and went to a lot of them. The ones I settled on were Cornell and MIT.
Okay.
And I got into Cornell and I got into MIT. And I went to MIT to visit. And all I saw were these students with their teeth chattering and totally nervous about exams. And also Poly Prep, where I went to school, was an all-male school, and I didn't like that. I really didn't. And MIT was like a repeat experience of this all-male, high-pressure school. I went to Cornell, and it was gorgeous. I mean, it was just up in the mountains. It was beautiful. There were 13 colleges, 5 engineering schools, liberal arts, home ec. Half the student body, or a quarter of them were women, and I wanted to go to Cornell. So I chose Cornell, and I went to a 5-year engineering program. It was 5 years at the time. And I got into electrical engineering school, and after 1 year I transferred to a very small college at Cornell called Engineering Physics, EP. And they were like the intellectual Green Berets of Cornell. And I went to the EP school. So it was very difficult. They only had about 75 students when I transferred in, and they cut half the class. So I did not graduate in the top quarter or anything like that. I mean, it was very, very hard. And these people in EP school, one of them became the provost at Stanford. Another one became the #2 scientist on the Star Wars program. They were very gifted people. They were incredibly gifted. I'm smart, but these guys were geniuses. I mean, I can have stories about Cornell. I mean, it was very difficult, and it was very scary. It was that difficult, and all the grades were curved. Anyway, I went out last year at Cornell, which is 5-year school. You have to decide what you want to do with your life, and I was very fascinated with President Kennedy's space program. So I ended up deciding I'm going to go to California, and I applied for and worked on at North American Aviation on the Apollo program, the thing to go to the moon. And so I arrived in California in October 1962, the week of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I didn't take seriously at the time. I should have, but I didn't understand that we were like one step away from nuclear war. And that's where I was in October '62, living in a little apartment in Downey, California, in the backyard of someone's home, the week of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and going to work in Downey, California, which had tens of thousands of people working on this Apollo program. And then I transferred there into the computer section, and we did computer simulations on stuff. And, the astronauts came, and there was actually a mock-up of the Apollo capsule, and I once sat in it at night. I talk about this in Best Evidence. And it was kind of an interesting place to work, and it was when I was working at North American that Kennedy was assassinated.
Right. And that's what got you into writing about his assassination?
No. What happened was I was working at North American. The assassination occurred for a full year. Nothing happened. The assassination was in November '63, and all the way through August, all the summer of '64, I really didn't. I was oblivious to it. I just thought it was a normal event, that terrible event that happened. I accepted what was I reading in the newspapers, and then in September 1964. When the Warren Report was issued, I got interested in the assassination because I went to a Mark Lane lecture. Now, Lane recently died, but a lot of us in the first generation went to one of his lectures, and he was very charismatic, and he got interested that something was wrong. Oswald might be innocent, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I got a little bit interested. Well, here's what really happened. I was at the UCLA bookstore buying a book, and I bought one of these periodicals about the assassination called 4 Dark Days in History. And I described this in Chapter 1 of Best Evidence. And what happened was I had met somebody in Southern California who had already plunged into the Warren Commission report and the 26 volumes of the Warren Commission. He was a real left-wing character. He's in his 80s now. he was the first person, and he got me interested.
Okay.
And I was at his home one night, and he showed me the 26 volumes, and specifically volume 18, which had the frames of the Zapruder film. And you could see in the frames of the film that when President Kennedy was shot in the head, his head went backwards.
Right.
Okay. Now, today it's obvious. You go on the internet. There was no internet in 1964 or 5. But I measured it with a ruler, and I was astounded because in physics, I mean, I knew what that meant, that he had to be shot from the front. And I was absolutely flabbergasted by this. And so I started reading about it. In 1965, spring, I was at the UCLA bookstore, and when I was at the checkout line, there was a pile of magazines called 4 Dark Days in History. I bought the magazine, and there on the page was the Mary Mormon photograph. And in the picture, I thought I could see the image of someone up on the grassy knoll. You know, that's how it started with me.
Wow.
I said, the magazine was published in California. So I went up to Hollywood Boulevard. I met the publisher, and I showed him the picture, and I said, can I get an enlargement of this? And he said, I'll do better. Excuse me. I said, can I get an enlargement? He said, I'll give you the negative. So he walked into a vault. It was really very mysterious. You know, pulls out this negative as if nobody else is going to care about it. He gave it to me. So I went to a photography studio on Hollywood Boulevard. He blew it up, and you could see these images. And they were very dramatic. Right. And I said, my God, there's somebody up there. This is the way it started for me. And this fellow, original guy who got me interested, his name was Ray Marcus. We made these blow-ups and started mailing them to reporters. And there was an author in Europe named Thomas Buchanan who wrote a famous book called Who Killed Kennedy? Buchanan sent these pictures around to Paris, Italy, Spain. They were published in magazines like Paris Match, El Trionfo. I remember he sent me the magazines, and they were my pictures published, you know. And it was taken seriously, not in the United States, but there in Europe.
Yeah.
And I was very excited about it. So those were pictures, but pictures are not definitive evidence. Pictures you can argue about. Meanwhile, I bought the 26 volumes of the Warren Commission and got very interested in reading the whole thing. And I described this experience in Best Evidence. And you could start, I mean, you could get lost in those volumes. It was like buying a 26-volume mystery story. I can't do better than what I wrote in the book, which was that this stuff was unindexed. They had the nerve to publish these volumes without an index, by the way. So you could find anything. You could open up a volume and find a transcript of the Dallas police radio transmissions, but then you could see the next page could be a chart of Jack Ruby's mother's mouth because somebody had testified and the dentist had submitted an exhibit. So it was stuff that was silly and stuff that was dead serious. And I got immersed in that. And in the beginning, it was very, very straightforward. I was just interested in, was there somebody shooting from the front? Now, in the spring of 1966, there was a man who you should look up on Google named Stanley Scheinbaum. Scheinbaum was, I can't do better than to tell you to look him up on Google, but he was a very well-known man, and he was connected with the magazine in San Francisco known as Ramparts magazine. You've heard of Ramparts? Yeah. Very new left, stylish, Catholic-based magazine. Scheinbaum was connected. He's Jewish, but he was connected with Ramparts. And Scheinbaum, from Marcus or something, heard of my interest, and he saw how involved I was, and he says, why don't you come up and join the staff at Ramparts magazine, and you can take all the stuff which you've already written up preliminarily. He could see what I'd written typed on a typewriter, no word processing. And I went up to Ramparts magazine the summer of 1966, and I and another writer named Dave Welsh wrote a 30,000-word essay, which you should get, called The Case for Three Assassins. I can get it for you. You can look it up in Google. Yeah. It was a very complicated essay, and it really laid out the case that there had to be someone shooting from the front, and secondly, there had to be at least 2 people shooting from the rear. That's why we called it The Case for Three Assassins. Right. It was just a way of approaching the case. And what was special about that article is I got to meet and interview the very famous physicist from Caltech, Richard Feynman, because I wanted Feynman to be my authority on the head snap. I mean, it's just Newton's laws that the head... Right. He looked at the frames in the Zapruder film, and for different reasons, which I explain in the book, he didn't want to become our witness. So we used a professor from UCLA named James Riddle. So you will find The Case for Three Assassins. It was a cover story in Ramparts magazine, written in the summer of '66, published in January '67 as a cover story in Ramparts magazine. Now, by that time, the Vietnam War was in full bloom, and the story about the Kennedy assassination, although it was a cover story, was completely superseded in importance by these color photographs of people who were being burned up with napalm in Vietnam because the war had escalated under Johnson, which I now believe was connected with the assassination, but that's another story. And so they had color photographs in there of burned up babies and people killed. And so it was really, to me, the war and the assassination, and to Ray and other people in the early movement of the Kennedy case, were obviously directly connected. We lived through the period where Kennedy had us going in one direction, and then Johnson became president, and suddenly the country veered off into the U.S. Army and Air Force being sent to Vietnam. This was not what anybody bargained for. It was completely new and amazing and stunning to me. Now, that's the way I experienced it, okay? That something very serious had happened. Now, I'm at Ramparts. That's the summer of 1966. And I worked very hard on that article, and I was totally immersed in all the data about the shots and everything. Now, here's what happened. I got back from Ramparts. I had racked up a series of incompletes at UCLA, 4 of them. So now I buried myself at the UCLA library. I took one of my incompletes and got a fine grade. There were 3 more. I think I got through the second one. But at that point, the dean of the engineering school called me in. And I remember he was very upset with me because I was involved with the Kennedy assassination. And I was supposed to be going to school. And I told him I couldn't help it. I mean, I was so interested in the business of the head snap and everything. And I had written this article, which I told him was going to be published. He didn't care. He was going to dismiss me from school. And he ordered my dismissal in early October 1966. So it was back at that time that something else was going on in my life, which really became very important and superseded everything else. What happened was, I had walked into the office of a law professor at UCLA who had been on the Warren Commission. And this starts a new chapter in my life. He was one of the important attorneys on the Warren Commission named Wesley Liebler. He had an office on the 2nd floor of the law school. He taught antitrust law. And in 1963 and 4, he was on the staff of the Warren Commission. There were 12 to 15 attorneys. He was in charge of writing the biography of Oswald, which became Chapter 7 of the Warren Commission report. Okay, it also was Appendix 13 or something, whatever. So I walked into Liebler's office basically very angry. I felt like I was in my attitude was, like I wanted to make a citizen's arrest of this guy. How could they publish a report that showed the head going backwards when he was supposed to be shot from behind? That was the big issue. And although Liebler's area of expertise was the biography of Oswald, he was absolutely fluent in other areas on the Warren Commission. He knew all about the medical. He knew a lot about everything because they were all very smart guys who were hired on the staff. They went to colleges like, University of Chicago, Yale, Harvard. They were creme de la creme attorneys, very smart. Whether they arrived at the right conclusion or not is another issue, but they were real smart. And Liebler was also he's the kind of person you wanted as a professor. He had a very dark sense of humor, very dark.
Was he a professor?
Yeah, professor of law, antitrust at UCLA. I showed him things he had never seen in the Warren Commission's 26 volumes. I remember, I said, there's a splice in the Zeb Bruder film. I said, what are you talking about? He took the thing off the shelf. I showed him, and he was astonished. He really was. And the next day, he wrote a letter to one of the senior people on the Warren Commission. No longer existed, but he said, we should look into this. And he said, here's a copy of the letter. He gave it to me. And that was October 1965. Okay, in the summer of 66, I was at Ramparts magazine. Liebler and I already had a relationship. I could walk into his office and talk to him. It was an extraordinary situation because nobody else who writes about the Kennedy assassination had a relationship like this with a Warren Commission attorney. Now, people who I knew thought I was a traitor because Liebler set up a class at UCLA on the Warren Report. I went to the class. He invited me to attend. As a student, or he didn't realize I'd just been dismissed, but anyway, I was attending as the devil's advocate in the class. And every week, there's about 15 students in the class. and they debate a different subject area. So I understood how the attorneys on the commission viewed the case against Oswald. And I could disagree with it, but I understood it real well. Okay. So in the summer of '66, I was at Ramparts. I came back, was completing my incompletes, and I decided I've done everything I can. I wrote a 30,000-word article. I'm going back to school. And I was really upset that I'd been dismissed, and I was thinking about appealing.
Why don't we take a break?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to the point of August 1966. I completed these incompletes. Then I got dismissed at UCLA. I decided I'm going to appeal this dismissal. This brings me to October. Now, in the summer of '66 is when the first major books on the Kennedy assassination controversy were published. Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment, #1 in the New York Times bestseller list. Edward Epstein's Inquest. If you look this stuff up, you'll see it's on it. It was in the news all the time. We're approaching the 3rd anniversary of President Kennedy's assassination, which is going to be in November '66. So I said, what am I going to do? I decided, can't do anything more than I've done. I've written a 30,000-word article. I knew the medical evidence inside out. And I was convinced there was more than one assassin. And what am I supposed to do as a private citizen? There was nowhere else to go. I mean, I don't have the power of subpoena. I'm not a special prosecutor. I was going to go back to school. Liebler comes back from his summer. He always spent the summers in Vermont. We resumed our usual debates. Only now I was even more educated about the medical evidence because I had finished this article. And we got into a serious debate, and it became very clear to me from watching the class that he had conducted it in the previous school year, and then we started the new class in 1966 fall, that this whole case turned on the autopsy report. Because the autopsy report said that President Kennedy was shot twice from behind, and the autopsy was done at Bethesda Naval Hospital on the night of President Kennedy's assassination.
And that was in your book, right?
Well, yeah, I'm recounting the story of my journey to what happened next.
Okay.
And what happened next was I'd written this article saying that this autopsy had to be wrong because there was all this evidence of shots from the front, which was not reflected in the autopsy. And it looked to me from the timing problem on the Zapruder film that the single bullet theory was wrong. Excuse me. And therefore, there must have been more than one shooter from behind if you believe that Oswald was firing at all. I didn't know what to make of that.
Right.
So there we were, locked in debate, and it came down to the location of one of the wounds on the body, and the back wound. Kennedy had a back wound. If you look at those diagrams, it was up in the shoulder area, an entry. And if it was high enough, the single bullet theory could be correct. And if it was too low, the single bullet theory was nonsense, and there were people who were lying about the wounds. So Liebler said to me, we had this big discussion or argument in his office, and he said to me, because in the margin of the diagram it said the wound was so many centimeters beneath the ear or something. He said, humans can measure with a ruler? And that was his argument. He says, look at the measurement, it's right there. How can you doubt the measurement? You're calling the guy a liar. That's the way it began for me, because in the fall of 1966, without realizing it, I made a slow transformation from thinking of the autopsy as a typewritten document, which is the way I had viewed it. It was a typewritten document, which was Appendix 10 or 13 in the Warren Report. You can read it. And I made the transformation from thinking of it as a typewritten document to thinking of it as wounds on the body. In other words, what was happening in my mind, although I didn't realize it at the time, was a very significant paradigm shift from thinking of the information as coming from a typewritten report to thinking of it as coming from the body of President Kennedy, okay? And that's a big difference when you cross that Rubicon from a typewritten report to the flesh and bones of President Kennedy's body. I had never thought of the body as evidence.
Right.
And even in my discussions with Liebler, I didn't think of it that way. But this started me when he said, Humes can measure, can he? And I started to visualize Humes measuring with a ruler, okay? So now we're into October 1966. And one of the books that came out was Inquest by Edward Edward Epstein. And in the back of inquest was the FBI report of the autopsy, which had never been published by the Warren Commission in the 26 volumes. And I had started to think about the body as evidence in a subconscious fashion, not articulating it as such. And then on the night of October 22nd or 3rd, it's in my book, I was at a friend's house, and I was really pondering about this. And I was saying, well, I wonder where the body was before it got to Bethesda Naval Hospital for the autopsy at 8 o'clock that night.
Right.
And I said, I better look at that FBI report. And I look at the FBI report, and I'm starting to think in terms of the body, not a typewritten document anymore.
And so this has changed your whole perspective?
This is the way it started.
Right,
Only
okay.
it took time for it to gel. And so that happened that night. And what happened is, I'm reading along in the report, and Air Force One comes in, and these two agents say the body was lowered in the elevated mechanism and put into the Navy ambulance. They followed the ambulance to Bethesda Naval Hospital. And then he says, blah, blah, blah. And they entered the autopsy room, and the autopsy started at 8 o'clock. And he says the body was put on the autopsy table, at which point it was apparent that a tracheotomy had been performed. Next sentence. As well as surgery of the head area, namely in the top of the skull. And I immediately, I said, what? You know, right away, I knew that somebody had messed with the body if the FBI was saying there had been surgery, because no surgery had been done in Dallas.
Right.
And anyway, what do those words mean, surgery? If a person dies, they don't have any surgery. He's pronounced dead at Parkland Hospital. So where do these words come from?
Exactly, yes.
So that night, it was astounding. I had this insight, and I said, oh my God. I said, basically I used all the language of physics and my science training to understand that there was a before and after situation on the body. Before was what the Dallas doctors saw. After was what's in the Bethesda autopsy report. And a comparison was very clear that they're different. Now I had a new paradigm, okay? And my girlfriend at the time was a UCLA student, and she was pre-med, and we started going over the autopsy testimony, and it was clear that something was very peculiar because nobody had looked at this testimony carefully, that the testimony and the description of the brain, had this parasagittal laceration, which was a linear cut in the brain. It looked to me like, and I called up a neurosurgeon I happened to know, and he said, his name was Dr. Avner Feldman, and he said, sounds like that brain was sectioned. Well, this is a whole new world. Nobody had ever thought of these things. So the next day, it happens that I was on TV opposite Wesley Liebler. Professor Liebler and I, it had been prearranged on a Sunday show called the Louis Lomax Show. He was a famous black, one of the first and most famous TV commentators in the 60s. He had a show. I already had this new insight, which was maybe 10, 12 hours old, that Kennedy's body had been messed with. And we had this argument, the usual argument about the grassy knoll. And he said, what do you want us to do? Look for a goblin up there? The autopsy shows the shots came from behind. There's no shots from the front as far as the evidence goes. I wasn't about to spill my new discovery.
Right.
I just wasn't going to do it. So I said to him after the show, I said, we have to have a meeting. I have something important to tell you. So the meeting was set for the next day, which was October 24th, 1966. And I have this all described, what happened in Best Evidence. And what happened was, by that time, I had already looked at the testimony. I'd already made certain comparisons. You can only do so much in the space of one day.
Right.
It was a very frightening experience. I called home. I was speaking to my mother on the phone. I said, can you believe this? They altered President Kennedy's body. She said, well, how do you know that? She says, how can you tell such a thing? I said, it's in an FBI report. I'm telling you, that's what they did. So now Liebler and I were going to meet the next day at the offices of one of the other Warren Commission attorneys that he used as a place to get away from the UCLA campus. Name was Joseph Ball on Wilshire Boulevard. A company with a Ball law firm, Ball, Hunt, and Hart. So I went up there, and Liebler was there in his, conference room doing some work, or an office, I forget which. So I had prepared notes. And I got into this discussion with him again, and I deliberately provoked him. And I provoked him because we had the same old argument we had on TV. And he said, okay, you say he shot from the front. Where's the bullet? So I said, oh, that's simple, Jim. And I got up from my table and walked around to his chair, got up behind him like as if I was his barber, and I took my finger across the skull. I said, they simply cut into his head and took the bullet out. And he looking at me, and I said, and that's why I went back to my seat and I took out my notes. And that's why the FBI report, that's why it was reported that when the president's body arrived, there'd been surgery of the head area, namely in the top of the skull.
Yeah.
And he slams his fist down on the desk. I mean, like the paper clips jumped, and he says, where does it say that? And I said, right here in the Siebert and O'Neill FBI report. And I threw it across the table at him, and he's looking at it. And he was stunned. And he says to me, do you realize what you found? He says, you found new evidence.
That's crazy.
That was a major turning point for me, because this was not just somebody saying this is new. This was a professor of law who had been on the staff of the Warren Commission. He had spent 10 months of his life looking at this.
And he's saying
that this is new. And now, he's not going to just accept it because it's in an FBI report. We went through a process there, back and forth. What did it mean? He's making notes, by the way, as I'm talking. And he left those notes accidentally in my copy of the Warren report. And I couldn't find my copy. I had to call up Ball's office the next week. Oh, yeah, we have your report. And I found my report. And there was his notes. So I was able to reconstruct between his notes as I talked and my notes exactly what happened at this meeting. Now, what happened at the meeting was a number of things. First of all, he wasn't going to just take me at my word, or he wasn't going to take the FBI simply because they wrote this statement. The first thing a lawyer is going to say was, how do you know it's true?
Exactly, yeah.
So what happened next was he called up a neurosurgeon that he knew, a pathologist. So I'm right there in the office, and he says, Joe, this is Jim Liebler here. His name was Jim. He says, I got to read you a description of a brain. I want to ask you what the cause of death is. Okay. So he reads these passages, which I had underlined for him or typed on my notes or something. He reads them very slowly to him. And then there's a pause. And then he barks into the phone. It doesn't matter whose brain it is. It could be Sadie Garfunkel's brain. What's the cause of death? And there's a pause. And he says, okay, thank you. His face flushed. He hangs up the phone. I said, what did he say? He said, sounds like he was hit with an axe. I said, what are we going to do? He said, well, I guess we'll have to get the FBI to jimmy up some evidence that Oswald ordered an axe. That's what Liebler said. This is in my book in chapter 9, my confrontation with Liebler. Then he calls up his top law student, who was a friend of his, and I'm being polite about this, but anyway, he married her the next year, and she became his wife for many years, and they had a couple of children. And her name was Susan. She became a professor of law at Loyola. And he says, get over here right away to Ball's office. Lifton's found surgery. Now, that's a very interesting statement, because what the heck does that mean out of context?
Right.
So that later convinced me that he had thought of this before I did. But he didn't understand what it would look like or what it would mean. But it would mean someone messed with the body, because I was showing all this evidence that he was shot from the front. But the autopsy said he shot from the rear. And this is what reconciled, built a bridge between the two groups of observations, the front, the Dallas group, and the Bethesda group. So she comes over in about a half hour, and by that time he'd been on the phone with other attorneys. He got on the phone with Bert Griffin, Arlen Specter, whose area was the medical. Now, he didn't let me listen to the phone conversation with Specter. He went into his own office. Comes out after about 5 minutes, and I said, what did he say? And he says, Specter hopes he gets through this with his balls intact. Quote, unquote. What's in best evidence? Because nobody knew about this. This thing had slid right by the commission. And you can think it's a cover-up, but it just slid right by. Now, why did I see it?
Right.
I mean, and by the way, I expected that maybe in the next month somebody else is going to see it. In the next month, 2 months, 3 months, years went by. Nobody saw this. Well, what happened next was Liebler, and we had a big discussion about this. The meeting went on for about 4 hours. This wasn't just one sentence in an FBI report. Okay, you say something happened to the body. When? Where? We went through the whole journey of the body, from Dallas, into the coffin, the pronouncement of death, into the coffin, over to Love Field, up onto Air Force One. Johnson says, no, we can't take off right away. Got to be sworn in. Then he's sworn in. Then the plane takes off at 2:47 Central Time, arrives in Andrews Air Force Base 6 p.m. Then the lift brings it down, go to Bethesda Hospital, arrives at whatever, 7 o'clock, autopsy starts at 8. I mean, we went through timelines. When could this have happened? We talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing led to another. And I'm not sure exactly where I am right now. But, so Liebler, so this was very important to Liebler because the FBI report was one of the first ones given to the Warren Commission. Mm-hmm. So it was about the second one. They got it by December. When these guys reported for work, that FBI report was there. Now remember, it's not sitting there in an envelope by itself. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff come in. You have to start researching this to understand how complex it gets. When I began, I had to buy a filing cabinet in my living room. Then I had to buy a second filing cabinet.
Wow.
Then a third, then a fourth. And then today I have 45 filing cabinets. And if we have time, we can go to one of my storage areas. And you can see it's like a library.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, it's a library.
Of all the evidence and stuff like that you collected.
The Warren Commission had 32 four-drawer cabinets. Today there were 5 million pages. Just do the math and you see what we're talking about, how many cubic feet of documents. So the fact that this was there is a needle in a haystack. It just happens to be a golden needle in a haystack. It's probably the most important statement made in any FBI report, I think.
Right.
So we're now into late October. What are we going to do about this? Okay, what's going to happen next? Meanwhile, I was thinking, okay, surgery of the head area, but Kennedy was also wounded in the neck, right? So I called up Dr. Malcolm Perry. These phone numbers were listed in the phone book at the time, area code 214, whatever it was. I got him on the phone. I didn't, I said, look, I'm a student at UCLA. I'm in Liebler's class. He didn't know why I was, what I knew. And I said, and I knew that the tracheotomy incision at the autopsy was 7 to 8 centimeters, according to the testimony. 7 to 8, that's a pretty big incision.
Yeah.
I said, we have to write papers, each one of the students in the class. And my job is to ascertain the length of the tracheotomy incision. I was like Columbo on the phone. I said, I'm sorry to bother you, but that's not obviously in the testimony. But they want to give us some experience in what it means to do fact-finding in an area of national security.
Wow.
I said, so could you tell me, Dr. Perry, how big was the tracheotomy incision that you made based on your recollection today? He said, 2 to 3 centimeters. So I said, I understood how important that was.
Yes.
I said, could it be 3.5? He says, well, you don't really have to make an incision that big. Well, what about 4? And then what about 4.5? What about, as I went up the ladder towards 6 to 7 or 7 to 8?
Which is what was in the report, right?
Well, the report said 6.5. When he was under oath, Commander Humes said 7 to 8, which is very serious because that's under oath before the Warren Commission.
Right.
Well, he started to get jumpy. He really got annoyed, a little bit bug-like. So I didn't want to bother him, but he clearly thought that was way out of line. You don't have to make an incision 3.5 inches. So thank you very much. I wrote down in my 26 volume, right there on the page, 2 to 3 centimeters. Then I said, I don't even know. Suppose I talked to somebody about that. How am I going to prove he said that? How am I going to do it? What's going to happen next? He's going to deny it. I said, I've got to get a tape recorder. So I ran out within a day or two. I ran out to a store. Now, they don't have it anymore in LA, called Adrays. If you look up Google, I'm sure you'll find Adrays. It's like Best Buy, of its day. So I went out and got a recorder. It recorded it at 1 7/8 per second, right? So, or 3 3/4. I put it at 1 7/8. I said, I got to call these guys up, all of them. And so I got my recorder. I had to buy an attachment. It's no big deal. I was a ham radio operator, K2HKC. I know how electronics. I was an electrical engineer. Hooked it up to the phone, and I called up Dr. Carrico. He was the first doctor that sees Kennedy. I got him on the phone. Same story, I'm a student, UCLA, in Liebler's class. Liebler's class was in the wire services that Professor Wesley Liebler at UCLA is holding a class on the Warren Commission, blah, blah, blah. So everybody knew about it. So I said, listen, I'm in Liebler's class. How big was the incision made, by Dr.
And he said the same thing,
He said 2 to 3 centimeters.
2 to 3.
Okay. So then I called all of them. Now I got one that said a little bit bigger, but about 2 or 3 days into this, I realized there was a second piece of data because the autopsy report said that when they got the body, it got 7 to 8 or 6 to 6.5 and widely gaping irregular edges. you know,
Huh.
where?
Yeah.
So I called, by the second or third doctor, I said, how big was the incision? You know, and I said, and what kind of edges? He said, well, smooth, of course. It was made with a knife, you know. So by this time I knew they not only had messed with the head, but somebody had messed with the neck.
Yeah.
And neither of the rear entries, neither on the shoulder nor in the head, were seen by the Dallas doctors, were reported. So clearly to me, somebody had altered the body. It wasn't just one little thing. It was global. Over the whole body, somebody had messed with the body and changed the geometry of the shooting of President Kennedy. And so what Humes was reporting in the autopsy report is the way the body looked at 8 o'clock that night. That's not the way it looked in Dallas.
Right.
So meanwhile, me and Liebler were having these conversations on the phone, and I decided I'd better record these conversations, which I did, every single one of them I had in October, November, December 1966. So then, what are we going to do? So in November, he says to me, I'm going to write a memorandum to Chief Justice Warren. So this is chapter 9 of Best Evidence, and 9 and 10. So he says, we're going to have a meeting. So me and Liebler and 2 of his paid assistants at the UCLA Law School, students who were on this special scholarship. One of them was Steve Myers. Now, Steve Myers died some years back, but he is the founder of Melvin and Myers, the Myers and whatever, which you see in all the cities. It's a national law firm now.
Okay.
You know, so Steve and me and Liebler, and he basically wanted me to bring all my notes, and he made notes, and then he generated a 13-page memorandum, which was dated November 8th, 1966. This memo was transmitted on November 16th, 1966, to Chief Justice Warren, Robert Kennedy, President Johnson, every member of the Warren Commission. And it laid out all these problems with the autopsy. And on page 12 or 13 of the last page, there's a whole page devoted to what I found. And it says, this discovery was made by David Lifton, a UCLA student. He's agreed not to talk about this until, you know, a proper investigation can be made, blah, blah, blah. So that's where matters stood. And I was very proud of that. And also I felt any danger I felt I might be in was alleviated or ameliorated because, look, I'm now in Liebler's memo. Now, about 2 weeks later, up at the UCLA Law School or something, he throws this thing and he says, look at this. And that was the response from the senior general counsel, J. Lee Rankin of the commission, with 13 or 15 copies sent to everybody. Basically, we've looked at this, we've seen your memo, you're a private citizen, the case is over, you can do what you want, but as far as we're concerned, the case is over. And then he says, and the best evidence of what happens at the autopsy is the autopsy report. That's the end of it. So at that point, it's when I said, you know, I'm going to write about this. You know, because I had this remarkable experience.
Right.
And I knew about journalism. I was, you know, managing editor of my high school newspaper. I figured it'll take me 6 months, 10 months to write this
And
up.
so that's what made you want to write the book.
Well, it made me want to write an article or something. Because I just written the case for 3 sentences. Excuse me.
Why don't we take a break?
Sure.
Okay.
So we got to the point in the story where I decided I'm going to write this up. And I honestly believed it would take 6 months to a year on the outside. I really had no idea when I began this journey, which was approximately December 1966, when I basically had the concept, okay, and this is from my science training, there's a before and after on the body. All I got to do is learn the before, index it, detail by detail, compare it to the after, and I'll have the evidence that the body was altered, right?
Right.
Okay. That's the beginning of a journey that I really believed would take about a year at the most. It took 15.
But in reality, it
took 15. And why? Why did that happen? So I'm going to try to jump through a number of different things that happened. First of all, I had to start ordering documents from the National Archives because it turns out this whole Warren Commission thing and this whole Kennedy thing is like a serious layer of onions. You can't just take the outmost layer, the stuff that was published. It turns out there's a lot more documents there. So I set up an account and started to order. Well, how do you pay for all that? Whether it's 20 or 30 cents a page. So I was in touch with other people. like Sylvia Marr in New York, Mary Farrell in Dallas. I said, I'm going to order this or that. At one point, I made an order for about 2,000 or 3,000 pages from the archives on microfilm. And they told me that never again should I submit an order like that. It wasn't the amount, but I asked them to sort it out in a such and such way so it came in indexed by subject. They said, no way. It took them way too much time. So anyway, the point is I ended up having people. I said, well, listen, this cost me $500. Each one contributed $150, whatever. So that sort of thing was going on. There's documents, buying filing cabinets. Suddenly my living room starts to look like an office. My apartment looks like a one-bedroom office. And I'm totally immersed in all different aspects of the Kennedy assassination. Not just the medical, but the whole police response. What was going on with the radio, on the Dallas police radio. If this body was altered to make it look like the shots came from the building when they came from over here, well, what about the police response? What happened in real time? In real time, you got the Dallas police radio within minutes saying, you know, got a witness here, says the shots came from that building. You know, well, was there really a witness that said that? Right. And if so, why? So it proliferated immediately into a very complex thing. I was out there in the store buying 3-ring binders, setting up a filing system, and believe me, because of my training, I was able to do it conceptually, but I had no idea how long it would take. I didn't realize what I was getting involved in. I was buying hundreds of file folders, manila file folders, and this and that. Okay, so I get involved in the book writing. Pretty early on in the spring of '67, there's this other question that comes up. Well, you know, you have to understand that there must have been an interruption in the custody of the body, and the lawyers call that chain of possession. Right. Now, I learned that from the UCLA Law School. I went up to the office of one of the professors, Lifton, and I said, can you explain to me, because I didn't have the concepts, because I was trained in science. I didn't know what they called this stuff. I didn't know the vocabulary. I said, suppose somebody goes into an office where the evidence is kept, opens the cabinet, takes out some evidence, does something to it, and puts it back in the cabinet. I said, what do you guys call that? So that's when I learned the concept in law of relevance, what's called relevance, chain of custody. And I went to the law library, and I read, the only book they had available was this classic published in 1912 by Wigmore. So I studied Wigmore on evidence on my own. So I learned a lot of vocabulary. Okay, I attend to Liebler's class. In the class, I watched the students march down the same garden path towards the wrong conclusions. Liebler and I would look at each other. We weren't saying anything about the body being altered, okay? Right. Okay, so I needed witnesses to show that there was an interruption in the chain of custody, and I had this idea of calling the members of the honor guard who were with the coffin from the time the body was offloaded. So you'll read about that in chapter 16 of Best Evidence, where I discovered that when the body got to Bethesda, there was this ambulance chase, and this admiral was driving an ambulance, and then they couldn't find the body or the coffin for about an hour, and so on and so forth. So that went on. Those were major discoveries. Those witnesses became chapter 16 of Best Evidence.
Is that why you decided to record them?
Yeah.
And like put them on film?
Everything I did was recorded.
Yes.
Everything. No, film was 10 or 15 15 years I didn't have camera. There was no motion picture film for me then.
So this was a lot later.
This is audio. This is all audio. And those recordings have been transferred to CD, and I think they're at the National Archives because I made a gift, but they're under seal or something. I have to check myself and find out what the status is of all that stuff. But all those 1966-7 recordings, which are reflected in the book Best Evidence, were on tape, and then this were transferred to CD. They were digitized. And there's a 33 CD-ROM set over at the National Archives, which will be unsealed, and people can go down the same path that I followed, okay?
Right.
So that's what happened. Now, this went on year after year. Now, I'm going to just jump ahead, okay? Because I thought in the beginning, for many years, that this ambulance chase described in Chapter 16 of Best Evidence was where it all occurred. That the body came in, everything was fine until the doorstep of Bethesda Naval Hospital, and then what do you know, there's this ambulance chase, somebody got the body, they made changes, and they sent it into the autopsy room. That was my concept. Completely incorrect. Totally incorrect. Wow. And what happened was the big paradigm shift, and it's a big one, occurred in July 1979, when I had just gotten my Best Evidence book contract. Remember, this time I had moved back to New York City. I'm living in my parents' home. I don't have any money. I'm writing a book. We had an auction for a big manuscript, and the manuscript was going to originally design that it would end on the doorstep of Bethesda Naval Hospital with the ambulance chase and all that business. And
but then you found...
Then I found there was a lead that's described in Chapter 25, a guy named Dennis David, who recently died. He was the officer of the day, and he describes the fact that the ambulance that came in had an empty coffin, and there was another ambulance. Well, this blew me away, but I also had, because again, my logic training in math, I swear you couldn't do this unless you were a math major, to figure out, I said, my God, if the body wasn't in the coffin, it was taken out of the coffin before Air Force One took off from Dallas.
Yeah.
That changed everything, because that meant it was not an after-the-fact cover-up, which occurred that night. Something happened in Dallas that was designed, and they got the body off Air Force One. How'd they do that? So I had witnesses to that. The first one was Dennis David. Then came the House Select Committee, published about 3 or 4 weeks after Dennis David interview, which was July 2nd, 79. In there, I'm reading, just like what happened in 66, only now it's 1979. It says, oh, the body arrived in a body bag. What, a body bag? So I called up the attorney on the warrant, on the House Select Committee. This is like a rerun of the Warrant Commission thing, experience. His name was Andy Purdy, today a Philadelphia lawyer. Andy, he knew me by that time, because I had been appearing before the House Select Committee in private sessions. I said, it says here in the report, just got it last week, that the body arrived in a body bag. Did he say body bag? And Purdy says to me, if he said body bag, no, if I wrote body bag, he said body bag. I said, well, it says body bag. And Purdy says to me, this is in the summer of 79, what's a body bag? This guy's the attorney investigating a homicide.
Right.
Now, of course, today that's ridiculous. After the Vietnam War, Andy Purdy didn't know. I said, do you understand what a body bag is? No, he didn't know. I had to explain it to him on the phone. I have a recording of this conversation with Andy Purdy. So this is all described in chapter 26 of Best Evidence. I said, listen, who is this guy O'Connor? Where is he? Where is he today? So he says, well, he lives in Florida, in I forget the name of the city, not in Jacksonville, Gainesville, Florida. So he helped me out, got O'Connor on the phone, August 5th, 1979. Put a recorder on the line. It was a beautiful day. I remember it. I remember clearly up in the room where I was living in Rockaway Beach, at 140 Beach, 135th Street. People are carrying beach chairs to the beach. I'm looking at, these beautiful, girls taking their beach chairs to the beach, and I'm on the phone with Paul O'Connor. And he's telling me how the body arrived. He has no idea anything's wrong. He said, yeah, the president's body brought in a body bag. And I said, tell me about that. And he says, well, I zipped open the body bag, and inside, I opened the coffin, and there was a body bag. It came in a shipping casket. Inside the shipping casket was a body bag. I unzipped the body bag. He said the cranium was, it was no brain. And I said to him, I had to design a question. I knew I needed this, and my tape recorder starting. I said, what was the condition of the interior of President Kennedy's head? He says, the cranium was empty. Empty. Wow. I mean, this was really stunning. And I'm looking at these beautiful women carrying these beach chairs to the beach, listening to this. I mean, part of me wanted to laugh, and I had to pinch myself. This was so ridiculous that this was in the account of Paul O'Connor telling me on the phone he had been interviewed by the House Select Committee. Those interviews were locked up until 1994 or 3 under the JFK Records Act, which only got passed because of Oliver Stone's 1991 film, JFK. And when those interviews were made public, they confirmed what he was telling me on the phone in August of 1979. But I didn't have the official government interview. General Counsel Blakey had locked it all up because he believed the mafia killed the president. He had locked it up for 50 years, and it wouldn't have been released if Oliver Stone hadn't made his movie, which led to the JFK Records Act in 1992. Okay. So he's telling me that the cranium was empty. And I went through a lot of other stuff, okay? And he talked about this gash in the throat. He says, oh, it was a mess. He said the esophagus was hanging out, and the trachea was damaged, and blah, blah, blah. It's not an ordinary tracheotomy. Somebody had done. Then later, I found out one of the witnesses in his chapter 23 of Best Evidence said this was sewn up. He said when he saw the body, this was sutured shut, okay? Now, I have since learned, and this will be in final charade, that suturing was done in the morgue at Bethesda Naval Hospital, and it had to be done under the auspices of those Navy admirals who were there, who were clearly acting under orders to clean up this mess. That the body had arrived in this botched up mess with the head a mess and the neck a mess. Okay, now I haven't written about this yet because I just discovered some of this stuff, that the body arrived with this craziness and then it was sewn up. So I know more about that now. Okay, so that's what happened in August of 79. And then I said, I got to interview the rest of these guys. Meanwhile, I had gotten a book contract with Macmillan, and the manuscript was already, pretty big. It was going into 24 chapters. Now I had all these new witnesses. I had to go to the president of Macmillan. He had said to me, we're going to publish your book. He told me this in the fall of 1978. He said, don't worry about what anybody says here. If you have a problem, you come to me. So I called him up. I got a problem. So we had a meeting in Manhattan at the offices of Macmillan at 866 3rd Avenue. And it was Jeremy Kaplan, the president, and the editor-in-chief, George Walsh, and of Macmillan. And we're sitting around, and I said, I can't finish the book by September 5th, 79. I said, all these new witnesses. I was afraid to tell him what I found. I didn't want to say the coffin was empty. He might say, get out of here. Come on. It can't be. But it was true because the body arrived before the coffin. So therefore, it couldn't have been in the coffin when Air Force One took off. So I did it the best I could. And he said, okay, how much time do you need? I said 6 or 8 months. He says, no. He says, January 1st, 1980. That's your deadline. So my mother and father, fortunately, had left for a trip to Mexico or something. I had the whole house to myself. I had the recorders. I started calling up everybody in the autopsy room. I got them all on tape. They're all quoted in the book, and I have tapes of all this stuff, okay? So now I had the whole story of the body bag, the shipping casket, and everything. So now we submitted the manuscript, and it's still, I couldn't finish it by January 1st, but I had synopses of the chapters.
Right.
And we had this big meeting at Macmillan. There was a big meeting around a conference room table, and you could tell everybody was really just blown away by this stuff. And they said, okay, we got to put this book out. And they were afraid of the government intervening and all that. And they said, okay, new deadline, April 1st, 1980. You've got to dead or die or you're going to cancel your contract. So I had 10 chapters to write. I told Peter Shepard, I can't do this. He said, yes, you can. Every day, just write from the day and morning. So every morning I got up. My mother was downstairs, or maybe I would go, I eat breakfast, I'd go back up to the room, I just type all day long. It was typing. There was no word processors. This book was typed by me in New York City.
Wow.
Express mail to Los Angeles, where my best friend, Bernie Kenton, who's now passed away, he would do editing and all kinds of stuff, make it beautifully typed on a selective typewriter, send it back by express mail. So it was written in Rockaway Beach, re-edited in Los Angeles, back to Rockaway Beach in New York, blah, blah, blah. All of this stuff was done, okay, by April 1st, 1980, which is a memorable day because the whole city was shut down by the transit strike. If you look in the New York Times, you'll see that. So I delivered the manuscript. I had to get a box big enough for this manuscript, which was 1,877 pages, triple space. And my mother and father had a box they bought, for the Sabbath dinners, challah box. I put the thing in the challah box, brought it up at 3 o'clock in the morning in New York. You could park in the streets. You can't in the middle of the day. And I went over and knocked on the door of 866, handed it to the guard and said, make sure this is, President Macmillan in the morning. That's how my manuscript was turned in to Macmillan as it is on April 1st, 1980. Now, here's what happened in the middle of March. In the middle of March, I made a major discovery. Which indicated that even though I thought I had the answer, there were still more layers of the onion. And that's going into final charade. But what happened was I found out that some of the doctors were lying. Now, I'm not going to get into the details right this minute, but that there was a Dallas setup. They weren't supposed to do this surgery after it left Dallas. They were supposed to do it in Dallas and at Parkland Hospital in connection with this whole setup, which I'm not going to get into right now, but I learned about the essence of it in March of 1980. And I brought it to my agent, Peter Shepard. He says, you can't put that in the book. You have to publish this book as is. He says, he could see, he says, there's no room. You have a contract. You have to get this in by April 1st. He says, you'll write another book someday. That was 1980. Today is 2018. Someday has arrived. Yes. That's what Final Charade is all about. Okay, so it's a brand new ball game. But anyway, what happened was we turned the book in, and the editor-in-chief, I remember shopping with him somewhere in Manhattan. He likes to jog, and he was buying sweat socks. He says, aren't you happy you turned it all in, and now we'll take over? Yeah, fat chance. Let me tell you what happened. The concept of editing this book was so unusual that they said, okay, my best friend, Pat Lambert in Los Angeles, was flown in, put on staff temporarily. They hired a hotel for her to stay in, and we edited the book. There was an hour with my friend as being the editor. So we didn't cut anything.
Awesome. Yeah,
they didn't cut anything. But and then the lawyers were sent in, and they didn't want to get sued. And there were meetings with the lawyers, which I could go into, but I won't right now. But it took up time. Then I realized what was going to happen when this book was published, that 60 Minutes was going to come in, and they were going to go and do a job on me. Because they were going to send out a film crew, and they'll go back to the same witnesses and make changes in the story and edit it with in smart-ass editing. and make it look like they didn't tell me what they told me in the telephone. And I was going to end up with telephone tapes, and they would have filmed interviews. So I went to the president of Macmillan, who by that time had changed it. Jeremy Kaplan had been promoted, a new fellow, Albert Latuca. And I said, we have to film the witnesses to make a preemptive strike. And this is when... So he says, I never made a film in my life. I mean, people go to film school to do this.
Yeah.
I had to get in touch with the right people. It was like a crash course, 2 weeks. And I had to come up with a budget, da-da-da, da-da-da. It turned out to be $12,000. And he said, okay, they'd pay for half if I took a debit against my royalties. It turned out it cost $27,000. But that's another story. So then I had to arrange for our film crew to go to all these cities. I had to hire a film crew, get a producer, get a sound man. Remember, we're filming in 16 millimeter negative, right?
Yes.
This is not digital yet. So everything's done with Ektachrome, I think, as I recall. But anyway, so we had a film crew. David Watts was the cameraman. Mark Dichter was the sound man. There was a guy named Arnon Mishkin, who you may have seen on CNN. He was my producer. And we had to fly to 5 different cities. I was on the phone making these complicated travel arrangements. And I remember I was on the phone once for about 5 or 8 hours with this lady from American Express preparing the tickets. And she says, you know, I'm really sorry, but I'm pregnant and I'm in my 7th month. And could you give me a little break here? Because we haven't worked out all the cities yet and all the complicated itineraries. Anyway, we did the filming. October 1980. I mean, I put the whole book at risk because if these guys changed their stories, my book was already going to the printer. Exactly. But they didn't. It was their peak experience in their life. And when you see Paul O'Connor in that video, that's Paul O'Connor in October 1980. They've all died now, I believe, except one, who I had not included in the film because he had changed his story and I felt he was suggestive and I didn't want to rely on him. Okay, his name was James Jenkins, and now he's gotten really angry, and he's writing a book about this, and he's going to try to attack me in 2018.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So, but all of them stood behind their stories. There was no waffling. And then came December 1980. We were in the editing room through Thanksgiving. I remember the Thanksgiving Day parade with the large balloon of Mickey Mouse going by our editing room on the 10th floor of some building in downtown Manhattan. We had the rough cut. We showed it to 60 Minutes, okay? Because this is a preemptive strike. We had a big meeting at 60 Minutes with the executive producer, Don Hewitt. And he looks at this 43-minute film, which is a version of the 37, with even more evidence in it. And when the lights go back on, he screams at me, "Did you pay these people?" I said, "Yes, $1 for the release." And then he calmed down. And Arnon said, come on, Don. He says, "Okay, we'll get you on 60 Minutes. You have to have a meeting with Dan Rather." So now comes a meeting with Dan Rather about a week later. And I'm sitting with Rather, and it's a repeat performance. The whole film screens. And it's over. The lights go on. I said, "What do you think?" He says, "Why would anybody want to alter the body?" And I couldn't believe I'm speaking to this man. Now, he was the one who reported the head snap and said, the head went violently forward, if you look at the history of this case. And he was telling me, "Why would you alter the body?" And then he says, I said, "Well, come on, Dan, what did you think of the witnesses?" He says, "Well, I think you found people who remember things, who recollect things a bit differently." That's what he said. He wouldn't do the program. If he had given the green light, I would have been on 60 Minutes. We wouldn't have been #1 on AP and UPI. We would have been #1. We were on the New York Times list for 12 weeks. We would have been on the New York Times list for a half a year if we were on 60 Minutes. Yeah. But he wouldn't do it. And he continued to make commentary as if best evidence didn't exist, which is outrageous. Okay? So I don't care for Dan Rather. I don't care for his ethics. And and if there was a special prosecutor, he'd be called before a grand jury. And not about me, but there's a lot of stuff that he did that's very peculiar in this case. But that's another story. So anyway, we edited the video. The book was published in January of 1981, and it was on the bestseller list within a month. And it stayed there for 12 weeks. And I was all over the country on multiple book tours. But by the time I was on the country, going around the country, I already knew there was this other layer, which I was not about to talk about because I couldn't, because I had to investigate it. Now, I know about that other layer. I'm just going to say a little bit about it right here.
Okay.
If you plan a crime and you're going to alter the body of the President of the United States, if you have a before and an after, that's the dumbest thing you can do. Because somebody's going to come along and compare those two records and say they're different. That person who came along was me. I was the one that found this stuff. Okay, and I wrote Best Evidence. But that's a hell of a way to plan a crime. It has a built-in Achilles heel. You can't do that. So the real question is, if you really have this plot to kill the president and get the bullets out of his body and mess with the body, how are you going to do it so that you can't leave two records? Because that's no longer a perfect crime. Now, it took me 1966 to find the material, 1981 to get it published, but still, it screws up the whole plot historically. And we're gonna win this debate in the war of the information battle space. We're gonna win. It hasn't. Wait till you see what happens in final charade. But the point is, so the plan couldn't have been that way because these people would have had to be dummies to decide to do the alteration after Parkland and before Bethesda, creating a before and after on the body. No way. So the question becomes, well, how did they expect to alter the body and get away with this and not have two records? You will find the answer in final charade. It's really sophisticated what they had planned. And you have every right to ask me, well, how do you know what they had planned? Well, the answer is to be found in certain evidence in the Dallas police radio transmissions. And I've gotten those transmissions, and I know what they had planned. Okay? And it's very sophisticated, very elegant, and it has the quality of a magician's trick. But I've unearthed the secret, and it's going to be in final charade. Okay? That's part of the book. The other part of the book is Oswald. And Oswald, who he was. Because if he didn't kill the president, then who the heck did? No, what's he doing in Dealey Plaza? Why did he order this rifle in March? What's he doing at the Texas School Book Depository with a rifle? One of the things you'll learn about Oswald in my book, Final Charade, which is a lot part about Oswald, is that this kid was gifted. He spoke 4 languages at the time of the assassination: English, Russian, he spoke Spanish, and he was studying German. Okay, he was multicultural, and he did not go to the Soviet Union because he was a neurotic or a psychopathic or anything. He had his own personal reasons for going to the Soviet Union, and he had an intelligence assignment. And when he came back from the Soviet Union in June '62, he fell in with the wrong people who he believed to be legitimate, and he thought he was on an undercover assignment, and I will explain the whole thing what happened in Dallas, but he is innocent. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about in the book was my relationship with Marina Oswald, because when my book was published in '81, she called me up because I was in Dallas on various TV programs, and we got to know each other, and we spoke frequently on the phone. And then finally in 1989, I said, you've got to say these things on camera that you're telling me. And we had this wonderful interview that was filmed in Dallas in 1990. And then the daughter agreed to an interview in '91. And you'll see some of that stuff on YouTube today. So you can see Marina saying that Lee loved President Kennedy. She says, I say this with a perfectly clear conscience. Lee Oswald adored Jack Kennedy. And you can see that on YouTube. So that's the deal. That's the journey I've been on. And I can only tell you that it's very complicated. And the reason it's taken time is that this stuff that I'm doing, I wish it had been financed, not by my parents' money, which was very limited, even though I've done a lot of work. But I wish I had a staff. Because I can't do everything. I can't index everything.
And you can have it done so much faster.
Yes, faster. I need an I need editorial assistance. I need research assistance. And every time I go and find something new, I end up, and I haven't even told you some of the other areas we've gotten into, like the Zapruder film and all that. There's a lot of work that has been done, and I have the filing cabinets to show it. And when you finally get to the end of the road, you say, well, I'm sorry, I'm now 78 years old, but I'm sorry, I can't live to 125. I got to really finish and put in manuscript form what I now know happened. And so that's what I'm trying to do.
That's amazing. Thank you for your time today.
Sure.
And sharing all of your insight.
Ride in a car, and you look in the rear view mirror, you see an accurate picture of where you've been. That's what the rear view mirror is on. But today, when our country looks in the rear view mirror, we have a false history because we don't know what happened in 1963. Now, if it was just a matter of a footnote of a second or third assassin, that's not true. If this body was altered, and basically what I've discovered, and we'll be in final charade, we had a coup. We had a coup, a secret plan to make Johnson president and to remove Kennedy from office with the appearance that it was a historical accident, when in fact it was a very carefully planned conspiracy. And when I mean conspiracy, I am not talking simply about a second or a third shooter. I'm talking about fraud in the evidence, the creation of a false reality. So it looks like a historical quirk of fate. Right. Kennedy got killed, Johnson became president, and oh yeah, by the way, the next year, the war in Vietnam got escalated, and you can go to the Vietnam War in Washington and see the 58,000 people that died in America, but what about the million in Asia? So it changed the whole nature of the country. Okay, that's what happened, and that does not look, that's not, first of all, that's the result of a crime, and if we had a special prosecutor and could go back and have the information that I now have available, you could have an entirely different kind of investigation. But that's not going to happen, because all those critical people have passed on. Right. Okay, so the reason is we have a false history, so that has to be repaired, because if we had a coup in 1963, as a sophisticated European explained to me some years back, all the regimes after that have been post-coup regimes until the United States owns up to what happened. Now, I was thinking to myself, how do you answer this question in a simple interview? And I was thinking about the fact that suppose someone grows up and then finds out when they're 15 or 20 or 25 or even 35 or 40 that their mother is not their mother and their father is not their father and they really are adopted and there's this whole other backstory that they knew nothing about. Right. I've been in situations like that. I know people who've been through that. Not a lot, but I've had some incidents in my life where I've been acquainted with that. It's really devastating to find out that your history is a false history, that you really don't know who your mother and your father is. That's what's going on today. We look in the rearview mirror, we have a false history, and I'd like to see that corrected, because until it's corrected, I don't see there's much hope.
What's to stop it to happening again?
Well, it's not just happening again, but you don't know who you are. We have a false understanding of who we as a people are, and I think that it will be very healthy for this country. Remember that scene in A Few Good Men where he says, you know, you can't handle the truth. That's the Colonel Jessup answer. You can't handle. Well, I think the country can handle the truth, that we had a coup. But I'd like to see it made official, not just some advertising campaign for Macmillan or the fact that my book was on the bestseller list. I'd like to see it officially acknowledged, what happened in Dallas in 1963, and that involves the major involvement.
So we want to present you with these gifts.
Thank you very much.
To thank you for all of your time.
Oh, this is for me. That's great. Hey, thank you very much. What's this?
I don't know.
Oh, wow. That's nice. That's great. And I'm really glad you guys are interested.
Yes.
Because not everybody is.
Do you hear an echo?
No.
Oh. But how many, so are we still doing 2 other cameras though? Okay, so we are. Okay, so we got that one all set up. What about the other one? Who's working on the other camera? Are you working on the other camera or which one? Do you have cleavers out somewhere? Camera. It's already, oh, that one's, okay, that's, okay. Where's the other camera then? No. One of theirs.
I brought mine.
No, you're good. Jacob, you guys have your other camera, right? Devin, you want to get the other camera out, bud? Because we still got to set up the third camera.
Just leave it off right now.
Can you sit down in that chair?
I just lowered it.
So this is a good thing to build.
You know how to adjust it?
I just figured out. I think you know what I was talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think
It's good right now? Yeah. All right. Press the button. Is that on? Yes.
Well,
that's all I got. Just for that camera?
Yeah, right. You can see green on a map. It's like boom, 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 boom. Okay. So I think that's Rockaway Beach, and that's the main Rockaway Beach. I drive over that every. I didn't drive over. My father went. This area in here, the streets are numbered from 0, all the way down here at 0, all the way up to 149th Street. You know, and this area up here is called Bell Harbor. That's right. So I mean, if you want to be fancy, it's like I grew up Bell Harbor around. I'm more of a proletarian guy. I say, yeah, I'm Rockaway Beach, New York. So that's Rockaway Beach, and you go down, I live on 45th Street, right?
Yeah, because I thought we were gonna have 3 cameras, so we only have 2 set up right now. So
Brooklyn, and there's a bus called the Green Bus Line. You get on the first
Cool.
stop of the train, it's Cemetery.
hey,
So that's the way.
when you guys are old like me someday, and you guys have your kids and your grandkids, you guys will be able to show them this someday.
Oh, so down.
So give me something right here. Here we go, brothers, right here. Give me something.
I don't know what's happened there now.
Stop and say hi to Kobe when we're done.
Yeah, that's what's up.
I lived there, that's where I lived.
Mr. Hoffman, you're working too hard, man. Working too hard, sir. Somebody give Zoe something to do. She's got her hands crossed. She needs something to do. You're holding the other mic though, aren't you? What?
I told Isaac to bring the extension cord and the cord from the other one.
For the other boom mic? We don't have it?
That's why I said I should have done it. I should have done it myself.
Oh no, that's why that's why I thought we had everything all set up, guys. Can you? Or can I? Yeah, sure. You got SD cards in? You got them in? Did you talk to Kleber about that thing he was talking about? Yeah. How's your angles, Ireland? Good? How's your angles? Your camera angles, are they good? Yeah. I can't believe we forgot the plug, though, for the other mic. I'll blame myself, because I should have wrote this stuff up. I just didn't have any time. No, because we got one for the new one, too, though. So, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. We're good. We're fine. No, that's just me. That's just me. I always want everything perfect. We're good. You guys are good. It's 11 o'clock. So, how much time do we got? 2.5?
Two and a half.
And we're still talking about going to the locker?
Hopefully, if we have
Okay.
time.
So, are we getting close? Or?
That's still going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good. I just wanted everybody to see how great you are doing what you're doing here. But yeah, so. Okay. All right.
You would hear yourself.
Is it just bouncing? It's cool.
Like you can hear basically anything.
Okay.
That one's a little bit static. This one.
Like if there was a little mouse scattering on the wood, you'd hear his low pause, right? Is that good?
What me and Zoe noticed on that pole, when we try to put it down, we feel like there's something stuck in there. So we don't know.
We've had it for a long time.
Yeah.
It's wear and tear. It's just wear and tear. When did you graduate?
January.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What's the game plan?
Huh?
What's the game plan?
I'm applying to the 2-year job at Shadow, so I can work there, and I'm going to be
Congratulations.
start next week.
Congratulations.
The right angle, when you're Rockaway, if you go up 5, you can see.
It's similar to having which is way back.
wrong, and it's not the 32. So apparently, the SD cards that we have are work with this code because makeup has a certain
Gavin, do we have any extra SD cards? Any? You have an extra one? Okay. How much time does it have on it? Do you know? Is that the new one I gave you? That new one from Evan?
Yeah.
You guys need an SD card? Do you need an SD card?
Possible.
We have one. We have one if you need one. Okay, we're good. Okay. Let's get rolling here. We gotta. Ireland. It's 11. It's 11 o'clock, sweetie.
It wasn't reading these ones, it's reading this one. Why is that? Because it's just a card. Don't mess with anything besides Jacob's family. She will kill me. As long as she kills you, she's making it. Don't worry about it. It's just focus.
So, are you going to want somebody here, like when you say, "Hey, we're going to take a pause and somebody stop it"? Zoe, come here, sweetie. Zoe. So I got something for you to do. So, are you running this camera?
No.
Oh, okay. Because I was just telling Ireland, because Ireland might say, "Hey, look, let's just stop for a couple of minutes." Zoe made it today, yay! It should just open. I think it should just open. Oh, no. Yeah, unlock it. There you go. I think everything probably has to go on a certain way, though, because we need that big container.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Brandon, give me your deep voice.
Hello, my name's Brandon.
That's it, see? That's it.
Want this to be your narrative voice?
Did you remember the narration from the movie?
Yeah.
Did you remember?
I don't remember the voice from it, but you know.
But I mean, did you remember the kid talking in it?
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for this one.
They want this voice to be narrative.
Yes, I think it would be a great voice. I think I have a new narrator after all, Jim.
Do we want to pull out the food real quick, or?
They can. Well, we got to bring in the big container, right?
Yeah.
We probably need that one first.
Well, they're waiting. Shall we do the group pictures to put the other camera away?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I have to.
So do we want to just put everything in for right now, then go back in? Yeah. You think? Okay. Okay. Just put everything in for right now, guys. Are you breathing now, girl?
Yeah.
But I mean, you were nervous.
Yeah.
I could not tell. You were really calm. Seriously.
Thank you.
But were you kind of shaking a little bit?
Yeah.
Really?
I thought you could see in the camera.
I know you asked Gavin, but I didn't even notice. Did you notice that she was shaking at all, man?
When I don't eat,
She was calm, dude.
I get shaky too. So I have to. They make fun of me because I eat like every 5 minutes.
You weigh like 70
My
pounds.
metabolism goes, like,
I need that metabolism, man. We need that metabolism, brother.
Yeah. So if I'm not eating constantly, I just get like I don't have food. So.
But you were like so professional.